and welcome to the Breaking the Guard podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about how to ruin a prize pupil in your gym. Okay, so we're going to go from catering to the student, which I usually work on with the athletes, and talking about from the coaching perspective. Although, if you are a student, this will be instructive as well because you will learn why a good gym will do things in a certain way. Now, I can talk from personal experience. I've run an academy now since 2000, more or less. 2001 when we officially opened Freestyle Fighting Academy in Miami, Florida. So 24 years or so, give or take a year, right? And during that time, I've had a lot of fighters come in to the gym. Uh, Nowadays, some of the big name fighters like George Masvidal was his first MMA gym was my brother and I teaching him, and we brought up his career to I think it was like 11-1 or something like that. So we've had a hand in dealing with some big stars and big personalities um, at the gym, and we've learned from trial and error how you can ruin these relationships. And they're surprisingly very simple to do if you are a very generous person, right? And I'll explain to you what I mean because most of us that get into the martial arts, we're looking to give back, right? At least that's been my experience. I got into the martial arts and I got so much out of it that when it wasn't like, oh, I want to make a whole lot of money, let me do this business that I am somewhat good at. That's not the mindset that most people start the martial arts with. It's more like, I really love this. How can I make a living out of doing this and help other people at the same time? That's more or less the mindset. And my brother and I were 18, 19 when we opened up our gym. So another aspect of this was also I need to keep training, and our instructor had moved, so we need to open up a gym as well, and we need to train people so that they can be our training partners. That was another aspect to it also. Okay, and I'm sure there's other motivations, but I would say those are probably cover most of your martial arts academy owners. It's a hobby that got out of control, right? Now, when you come into it from that mindset, you are really excited to be able to work with people who are equally excited to become an athlete. So when you encounter somebody who's willing to put in the time, they have some natural gifts, and they are dedicated and willing to do whatever you tell them to do, as a coach, you feel like, okay, this is now my opportunity to really help someone shine. And I'm trying to guide them through that path the best way I can. As happens to be the case more often than not, most young men, and I'm going to say that because with very rare exception, just about all the people that come into fighting are young men, right? And I'll remark on that because I think for the most part, people who are looking to get into martial arts training and in sports as well, but I think martial arts definitely seems to have an even more slanted, is that you are looking for a male role model and you have something to prove, right? Because if you have a very strong father figure in your house, you're usually just going to get good leadership from them, and you won't really need to seek a mentor, right? Because you have somebody that's already done that for you in your own household who is the ultimate authority figure. He's your dad. I would say the vast majority of the fighters that we've trained do not have father figures. They're either, they passed away, they've never met them, they're in prison, right? Or they're just not available. Uh, the only ones I think I can only think of two: myself, because my father was around and he was a good man, and one other fighter that I've worked with at our gym. The rest of them did not have a father figure, right? That's an important element in how this relationship is going to play. Because whether you like it or not, when you're the coach, you are the dad, especially to somebody who doesn't really have a dad in their life. Because you're are a male. Well, again, I'm talking as a male, right? So if you're a female coach, maybe that dynamic's a little different. I couldn't comment. But as a man, you're coaching another man. They're looking up to you like dad, right? And it will happen whether or not they're conscious of it. This is important because we might not see it like that as a coach. We might just think, I'm a coach, you're the athlete. But that's not how it's actually experienced. And I think even from the coach's end, you do take somewhat of a father figure role yourself in trying to help somebody like they're your own children, right? They're your son, they're your daughter. So there is a little bit of that, but even without that aspect, definitely from the other end, it's going to happen. It's just natural. You're being coached by somebody and you're looking up to them. They're telling you how to do things. They're looking out for you every which way. That's what a father does, right? Uh, so with that in mind, what can happen, which also happens in normal parental relationships, is that you will start to spoil that athlete. And there are a lot of ways you can do that, right? For example, because of the nature of fighting, it's a poverty sport. The fighter might have some money coming in. They start training with you, and as they get more serious in training, you realize they're short on funds. So you see the young talent and the potential, and you're like, you know what? I'll take you under my wing. We'll scholarship you, right? You won't have to pay anything. Um, and we'll just focus on your training and you'll make it up to us on the back end, right? That happens a lot, right? And it's kind of the opposite scenario where normally the people you spend the most time with are the ones that you charge the most. But in the fight world and the martial arts world is usually the opposite. The people who you spend the most time on, you're usually making the least money out of, right? So it's kind of a weird thing, but that happens with children, right? You spend all your time for your children and you're not making money off your kids, right? So that's where this type of dynamic can get kind of screwy. Because if your kids are getting all of your time, they're getting a lot of coaching from you, and you're not giving them any errands, you're not giving them any chores, no responsibilities. They just do what you tell them to do as far as athletic responsibilities. You're spoiling them. They're getting something for nothing. The human mind does not comprehend that concept, right? No one gets something for nothing. What happens when you first allow an athlete to come and train for free? They will express gratitude almost immediately. They'll be, oh, thank you so much. I'll never forget this. Uh, I'll make it up to you, blah, 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 whatever. And that feels fine, right? Over time, they're going to start rationalizing what happened there, right? Initially, there's gratitude that will eventually turn into deserving, right? They're going to start thinking, well, I deserved this opportunity, right? Because I was so talented and I was dedicated. And, at the same time, coach is getting something out of this also because he's getting the exposure from, my fighting, and it's elevating the gym and bringing people in because they see my fights, so it's a good deal for the both of us. That's, believe it or not, I've had amateur fighters, say crazy stuff like that who nobody knows who they were, right? And it's no discredit to them, it's just the reality of the situation, right? um, so you would have people saying stuff like that, and that's them rationalizing, oh, I don't owe this guy anything. He didn't give me something for free. It was an exchange of services. He gave me all this coaching advice in exchange for the exposure that I'm giving him, right? Or for the opportunity to work with somebody as talented as me. That's some of the mental gymnastics that will go on because you gave them something for nothing and they don't believe it. That's true. So there's got to be something for it. And they will fetch far out ideas to fill that up. When that happens, the relationship is starting to turn, not in a good way. At a certain point, that's going to go from gratitude to deserving, ultimately to wanting more. They're going to feel, especially if their career is going very well, at a certain point, they're going to be like, man, I am giving up so much exposure and I'm making, all these big fights happen. I should be getting more out of this relationship than I am. And when a fighter thinks that way, he's on the way out the door. Because now the next thing that's going to happen is they're going to start shopping around. And of course, if their career is going well, they're going to have everybody whispering in their ear, oh, you should go to this place, you should go to that place, you should be getting this. So like things are going to go really bad there. And if you got into that point, it's pretty much over, right? I would make it the equivalent of a husband that goes to a private eye, a private detective, to snoop on his wife to see if she's cheating on him. It's like it's already over. If you had to do that, it's done. The trust is already dead. So, and you'll be surprised by some of the times that this has happened over the years. At least just from my own experience, I've had people who thought that we weren't doing enough for them because we didn't buy them a car to drive around, or we didn't kick out people they didn't like in the gym so that they could just be there by themselves with us. All sorts of very far out requests that you would get from a diva, right? And this happens when you don't raise the fighters right, right? And I say that because since it is, in my opinion, a parental relationship, you have to treat it like you're going to raise your own kids. How are you going to prepare this? And for the most part, you're dealing with young men, right? So you got to raise them right. How do you do that? One, you don't give anything for free. They have to pay. If they can't pay with money, they're going to pay with time, right? And we had, I think, one, maybe two generations of fighters that we did wrong, but consequent generations we did right. And all those guys are still with us and they're all thriving. So I'm very proud of that. And of course, I'm grateful for my brother because he was a big part of it, of that realization as well. So everybody has to work for something. It doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter how special they are, they have to pay. Time or money, something as an exchange of services has to be done. So if somebody's dead broke, then okay, you're going to work as a janitor for X amount of hours per week, or you're going to teach X amount of classes, or whatever the thing is. As a bonus, again, all credit to my brother in this, he positioned our guys who were like scholarship guys to doing jobs that could actually translate to a career after the fight game. So some people got into marketing, web design, sales, right? Firearms instruction, all sorts of things that even if the fight career didn't take off the way you wanted it to, you learned a valuable skill that would translate into other areas of life. So if you even grew out of the fight game, you would be ready for another career. And quite a few of those guys did do that and did very well for themselves. So once again, Of course, not everybody has the resources or the knowledge to do that, but at the very least, you want them to work for something, right? Don't give training for free. And just remind yourself, right, that the fighters are not the ones that are paying the bills, right? You have maybe, if you had a big gym, you have 20 fighters, right? That's it. That's a lot of fighters in your gym. That's not going to cover your bills, right? If you're doing well in your gym, you have hundreds of students. Those people are paying the bills. So it's only fair if the fighters are going to take up more of your time, which they are, they should be compensating you more, right? So, and relying on fighters to fight, to pay you, a percentage of the portion of their purse, it could be a recipe for disaster if you don't have the right guidelines in place. Like some people, they say, "Oh, I want to join the fight team," but then they fight once a year. And if you're fighting at a low level pro circuit, you're making like $100 a fight. The coach is not getting anything, right? Um, and so that's why I'm not big on collecting purses. I rather have, either stable income coming from them or a stable amount of work being done by them that offsets that. Just make sure you're being compensated, right? And it's not just for you, it's for them. Because if they don't have to exchange time or money, they're not going to value it, right? They're going to think it's not that valuable. And I can give an example. I remember we had a fighter come in once and he was paying for a while a discount rate. And at a certain point, he like went out of town, came back, and then just kind of snuck in and stopped paying. But he was still training. When we approached him about it, he's like, "Oh yeah, I can't afford to pay." We're like, "Okay, well you can work X amount of hours a week." And then he says, "Oh, I can't do that." We're like, "Oh, I guess you have a decision to make whether you want to continue, training with us or not." And then he goes, "Okay, I'll have to think about it." And he left. And he was actually talking to my brother. My brother relayed me this story. I was out front. And at the time, I had got one of those like Vibram five finger shoes, which was new, right? It was like, oh, cutting edge tech. And he saw it and he was very impressed with like, oh, these are very cool shoes. Like, where'd you get them from? I'm like, oh, I got them from this store. He's like, oh, how much they cost? I I think the price was like $90 because that was the discount rate actually that my brother just pitched him. He's like, oh, okay, cool. So he leaves, comes in a couple days later, tells my brother he can't afford to do the training. He doesn't want to do the janitor work, so he's going to quit. And he walked in and out of the building with the shoes that I had. What does that tell you? Well, he didn't value the training. Right? He valued getting shoes over being able to train. When you spoil people or when you don't manage the relationship properly and undervalue yourself, you're going to put yourself in a position where you're not going to be able to effectively communicate and have a good relationship with that fighter. So don't underprice yourself. Full price, if anything, more than full price, because they're going to take up a lot of your time. Fighters have lots of unique dramas that they deal with, and they have the weight cuts and all sorts of things depending on how involved you are in their career. If you're not just training them, but you're also managing their, getting them sponsors and booking their fights, and you're essentially functioning as your agent also. That's a whole other can of worms, right? So I stress that a lot because this is where most people fail, right? Most coaches are going to make that mistake. And I'm sure if you're a coach and you're watching this, you've already done it, right? You're looking, watching the video, nodding your head, right? Because every coach I've ever talked to has the same sob story, right? And it's happened to everybody. It's kind of like uh, your first girlfriend or boyfriend, and you get your heart broken. It's like everybody's gone through that story before. Just about every coach has gone through it. Now, not every coach learns from it. So hopefully, me sharing some of these little anecdotes here will be useful for you so that you don't repeat the mistakes. And if you're planning on being a coach someday, hopefully you never do it, right? So always make them pay for the training, again, in either cash money or in exchange of services. As long as they had to earn it, they're going to appreciate it, right? It's just like your kids. If you just let your kids have run of the house and they never have to do any chores, you're going to spoil them rotten. And they're not going to appreciate anything because they never had to work for anything. They never had to do, their chores. They had to make the bed or do the dishes. Like, you need the exchange of services to create value and appreciation. That's one. Okay. Now, once you've set that up, that is probably the biggest hurdle, right? Because once you could get that going, the next big thing, and this is now going to be more on the coach than it is the athlete, is that you have to be dedicated to the craft, right? And that means that you're studying constantly. You're watching fights, you're reviewing tape, you're going to seminars, learning new techniques. As the coach, especially if you're the head coach, you are supposed to be the fountain of information that the athlete can come to and quench their thirst. If you're not able to constantly supply that athlete with new information, they might feel at a certain point that they have learned everything they can from you. If that happens, you will have also lost their confidence. And even if they've been paying for the training and you got that part of the relationship where they're not spoiled in that fashion, you will have failed them by not being studious, right? So this means that as the coach, you're not taking days off, right? You're always studying. You can't just say, oh, you know what? I'm a black belt. I've been training 15 years. I'm good now. I can just sit on my laurels and uh, disperse the knowledge that I know. If you're a good coach, you're going to disperse what you know quicker. And they're going to learn faster than you did if you're doing your job well, which also means they're going to get better than you fairly quickly. And that's a good thing, but it's not a good thing if you're not studying, because you have to constantly be getting better as well. Now, you're obviously not going to, if you're an older guy, you're not going to be able to compete with the fighter. At a certain point in sparring, you might be losing to them just because of, the tendency of time. But you should still be able to coach somebody in good strategies and by studying tape, and especially when you're reviewing how their training is supposed to work. Because most athletes, not all of them, but most of them prefer just being told what to do, right? Especially if you have rigorous training standards, the training is going to be very difficult in itself. And if the athlete has a job that they have to support themselves with also, they're going to be tired from that. So they don't want to have to exert a lot of mental energy in like doing research, like how to diet properly, how to do their weight cut, what parts of the game they should be working on for this next fight. That is the coach's job. It requires a lot of attention. It requires a lot of notes and studying, as I mentioned. So if you're going to slack off there, just be careful, because you might be able to build people to a certain point of their career, but because you're not being studious, you'll start losing them. And usually you're going to start losing them when they're getting to the best part of their career, right? So always be a student of the game. Now, some people, they will perceive threats to their authority, a position of authority as a coach, if that athlete starts looking towards other coaches for guidance, right? It's important that I believe your fighter should be training in your gym 99% of the time. I don't think it's a great idea to have athletes going from gym to gym, and I think that's not that helpful, and it also does muddy the waters a bit of who's the authority figure here. Who is this guy's coach? especially if he's going without you and he's just going to another gym without you watching or guiding. How are you going to guide your athlete if you're not there to watch him, right? So typically, we would always want people coming to our gym. Now, you can always fly people into your gym. You could always bring people, invite people into your gym, right? So, and it's happened many times throughout our years in business where I needed new looks. I needed southpaw partners or some in particular size. My brother would, put out a word, would bring in, two or three guys so I can work with them. I didn't have to go anywhere. They came to us, right? And, you could do the same thing with coaches, which we've also done, where we wanted to get a particular technique or position and learn better from. We will fly in people so that they can do seminars, or they could even run, a couple of weeks of training and go over their systems, right? So even if you lack all the expertise yourself, by being the organizer, head coach, you still remain the authority figure, right? Because you're the guy who's recognizes the areas. So kind of like if you look at someone like the president of a country, right? He doesn't know everything, but he's the final decision maker. And he's the one responsible for bringing talent in that knows how to deal with a particular issue and then getting an informed opinion and being able to make a smart decision, right? Just like a CEO or any executive leader would, right? The leader is not the most intelligent person, no, not the most knowledgeable person that exists, but he knows how to put people in the right places. So as the coach, if you find that you're going to be deficient in certain areas, and we all are, right? It's wise for you, rather than your athlete recognizing that you don't have that talent or that knowledge and you're not willing to get it, to have them look for it on their own, that I will recognize it beforehand and go, oh, okay, maybe my weight cutting skills are not as high level as I need them to be, and this particular athlete needs a lot of help. I need to bring someone in here so that he can benefit from it. And at the same time, I'm going to be taking notes, learning from it. So then from the future, I'll be armed and ready to go there, right? So there's nothing stopping a coach who has some lack of knowledge in certain areas from bringing in athletes or bringing in other coaches so that they can supplement their knowledge, right? And of course, this applies to, instructional courses or books, seminars. Like, you should be soaking up all these things. One of the coaches that I've seen that does a phenomenal job of this is John Danaher. He studies the game relentlessly, and he's a guy who has lots of knowledge, right? And especially, well, strictly in those martial arts areas, he's watching tape all the time. He's studying. He's workshopping things with his top students. So he's always staying sharp. But even him, he recognizes areas where he's not an expert at. Like if I remember correctly, he told me he doesn't do anything about nutrition because he's seen all sorts of strategies work. He's not going to try to figure it out. Same thing with conditioning. He's seen people like Gordon who do like bodybuilder style lifting, and then there's other people like Nicky Rod that are doing like more explosive, hypertrophy style things, or power, and that works there. So it's like, I'm not going to try to be an expert there either, which is smart, right? You can only specialize in certain amounts of knowledge sets. So pick the ones you're going to be really good at, and the other ones you can delegate it to other coaches, right? And just making sure that you're keeping command of everything going on. So this is a second important area, right? Which you have to be a student and be able to continuously provide information to your athletes, right? Which means, one, that you're studying the game, right? So you're not being, passive and just resting on your laurels and just going to give people what you learned and not learn anything else new. You're going to seminars, you're studying videos, you're watching fights, you're reviewing tape. All these things are very important. And on top of that, when you know there's deficits in your game, you'll bring in talent, whether it's athletes or whether it's coaches. You'll bring them in house so that people, your athletes, can benefit from that, and at the same time, you'll be able to bolster your skill set. So you will now have that new skill set under your belt, right? So that's important. If you lose that authority position with your athletes, they're not going to respect you, right? It kind of, it's going to work in a very similar fashion as the spoiled child in the first part of this, which is if they might have initially saw your skill set, say, wow, this guy knows a lot. And then as they start learning more and more, when they start feeling that they've tapped you out of knowledge, they're like, oh man, coach was good, but I've kind of hit the limit, right? It's like I finished the book on coach. You don't want anybody finishing your book, right? Your book should be endless. And not just for their sake, for your sake, right? Like, why you're stopping your personal development, right? We should always be growing. So you have to be humble there. You don't know everything there is to know, and you never will. But you're not going to stop learning because of that, right? In fact, that's going to be your endless pursuit of perfection, is to continuously learn. So just like you would want your athlete to continuously learn and get better, you should expect the same for yourself and lead by example. All right, so that's area number 2, which is going to be continuously improve upon your skill set, right? So that you are constantly growing. Third thing is also a big issue, which is setting the expectations of what being part of your fight program looks like. If you just invite people to become fighters, anybody who wants to say, oh, I want to fight for you, like, okay, sure, come on in. You're going to have a lot of looky-loos and a lot of wannabes that just want to say that they're trained with a fight team and not really do any of the work. Or you'll have people that will sit around and just jerk you around saying that they want to fight, but there's always an excuse like, oh, I got something coming up, oh, I got work, oh, whatever the case is. So you end up training somebody as a fighter for like 6 months and they never fight. And at a certain point, you have to realize this guy's is a joker. And there's nothing wrong with that, but he's not cut out for this. There has to be written guidelines and expectations of what it means to be a professional or even an amateur, but in your fight training program, right? For us, there is a rite of passage, which you have to make it through a trial, right? Where we put people through a rigorous tryout, a lot of conditioning, a lot of sparring. It's pretty rough, and it's designed to weed out the people who would be the looky-loos, right? Who just want to see what it's like and maybe just fantasize about being a fighter, but not actually do it. If somebody's able to go through this rigorous training and survive and perform up to what you believe is a standard that you would want, then you can invite them from that point to be in the program, granted that they fulfill certain obligations, right? Now, one, besides what we talked about before as far as compensation, whether it's financial or services, that's one part of it. The second part of it would be, obviously, if you're negotiating purse as well, you might have to, you want to be upfront, have that there for training compensation and whatnot. The other part of it is how dedicated they're going to be to the training, right? You might say, if you're going to be in the fight team, you have to be training at least 5 times a week, right? And you might have a class or a training session that's just dedicated to the pro fighters. So then you might say they're required to attend these types of sessions, or they might just go into regular classes and they have to attend a certain amount of classes as well for skill building, right? So there should be a training expectation, because the last thing you want is someone who says he wants to be a fighter but only trains once a week. It's like, what type of fighter are you going to be? You're going to be a clown. No good, right? And you, as a coach, you don't want to train clowns, right? Because they're going to reflect poorly on you. So I only want to be working with people who are deadly serious because I'm deadly serious about what I'm doing. So if you're not going to be as dedicated as I am, kick rocks, right? So again, having a training expectation is very important. Then there also has to be a fight commitment. You might tell somebody, if you're in the fight team, that means that you need to have a fight booked within X period of time. If you're not ready to do that, you can't be in the fight team, right? Because that means you still have work to do, which there's nothing wrong with that, but you'll have to try again later once you're ready to commit. That's also going to take care of the looky-loos quite a bit, right? Anybody who just wants to tease or just train with the fighters but not actually be the fighter, you'll get them out of the way right there, right? Because there's going to be a commitment to fight. Now, uh, obviously, this can be more lenient once you have people who are a proven commodity, right? But I think if you're going to have people who are trying out and you don't know what they're about for real, you need to see what they're made of, right? And nothing is going to get that out of the way faster than getting them to book a fight. If you have a guy who wants to be in the fight team and train for 2 years before he books his first fight, it's like, no, you should just be in the regular program then because you're not ready to fight, right? Uh, the other thing I think it's also important is a commitment to skill building. A lot of times I see fighters, they are really committed to the fight camps, but fight camps are not generally about skill building. They're about working on a game plan where we have a particular opponent. You know, like I said, if you're a good coach, you're watching their tape, you're reviewing what your athlete's like, and then you're gonna see where you can win the fight, right? Like, okay, this guy's maybe really weak on the ground, but he's pretty sharp in his feet. We got to work on our clinch game, putting him on the fence, getting him on the ground so that my athlete will then have the upper hand and be able to dominate there. And we might be weary of particular strikes or techniques that they might have at their disposal. So like we're working on lots of particular skills specific to that fight camp, right? Usually though, you're not building your overall skill set. And you could see it clearly just in the UFC, how many black belts are fighting in the UFC? Not a lot. You have lots of people that are like purple belts and blue belts. I'm not even sure John Jones is a black belt yet, right? So it's like that doesn't mean their skills are not up to par, but it's just something to think about, right? For us, like we don't allow people to join the fight team unless they're a blue belt by us, right? And our system of fighting, freestyle fighting, considers all elements of mixed martial arts. So we break it down to three core parts: striking, wrestling, grappling, right? You have to know skills from each set in order to advance. So from my view, it's much harder to get belts from us than anywhere else because you have to know everything, right, in the fight game. It's not just grappling. Nevertheless, I feel there should be an expectation of a minimum skill set that you have to have before you'll be accepted into the team, and also a path to continuing to build your skill set as you are a fighter. Obviously, when you have fight camps, your skill progression is probably going to be a little bit more limited, but off fight camps, you should be building skill more, right? And you shouldn't be like what you don't want to see, and this is also a good test of a fighter, is if after they fight, they just go and party around for like a couple months and kind of, just goof off. That's not a good sign because that's a guy that's a joker, right? You want somebody that the moment they are well, they are already training again. That's somebody who's serious about their career and that is willing to build up. So these are also things that you have to look out for. And once again, this is just goes back to raising a kid, right? If you're gonna put time into them, you got to create responsibilities, and you also have to be fair and give proper expectations. If I expected all these things in my head, but I never communicated it to the athlete, it's unfair. They didn't know I had all these things and priorities that I had that were important. They just thought that they could show up whenever they want, do whatever they want, and get away with it. But if I would have told them up front, right from the get go, everything that I want to see from my athlete, they will then know whether they're cut out for this or not. They might say, "Man, this is serious. I'm not about this life," or they might see all this stuff and they go, "Hell yeah, this is what I'm about." And thank you for laying this out for me because now I know what I need to do. And once again, I told you they don't want to think as much most of the time. They want to execute and they want to be able to rely on you being the brain, right? So that they could be the brawn. And that's your main job as a coach. Ideally, is that you can play the fighter like a video game, and you've armed them with all the tools to be able to execute effectively, right? So you're the strategic mastermind. You're the fountain of knowledge. You're supposed to be able to disperse all that to that athlete. But if you're not setting the expectations for what it is to be part of your fight team, you're going to set yourself up for a fall, right? And you're going to set them up for a fall, which is a double failure, right? So remember, ultimately, we want to try to help these people achieve their goals and achieve as much success as possible. Right now, not every fighter is going to be a world champion, but there's varying measures of success and victory, and even the guys who don't become a world champion can still become something greater than they were before, which is still a W in my book. So we'll end it there. Those three are pretty deep, right? And I think that's a very good starting point. If you had those three down packed, chances are your amount of situations you're going to have with your fighters is going to diminish greatly, right? So if we recapped, one, always make them pay for training, whether it's time or money or services. Two, be the fountain of knowledge, study constantly, recruit coaches and athletes to help up your game, and always keep that authority level figure with your athlete so that not only are you able to help them, but you're also deserving of that relationship of being the mentor because you're leading by example. And then three, set proper expectations and guidelines of what it means to be in your fight team, right? Whether minimum requirements of being in there, doing a rite of passage to be able to earn the spot, the amount of time that they should be training every week, setting a fight commitment for them. These are all things that are going to be very important to fostering a good relationship with your athletes, right? And when the more things that are communicated up front, right from the get-go, the better the relationship is going to work out. All right, so that's all I have for you for today. Again, if you enjoyed this, let me know because, of course, I can drop a lot of coaching knowledge as far as being a better coach, right? Not just as far as coaching athletes, from the athlete's perspective, but this is from the coach's perspective. Anyhow, I wish you all Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, in case this comes out a little later, right? And I'll see you next time.